Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Notes to Self podcast. If you're new here, thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Rachel Huynh, and if you're curious on what this podcast is about, it's based around the idea of me leaving notes to a previous version of myself that could have benefited to hear from the advice and wisdom that I have to share now on whatever topic the episode is focused on discussing here today. I truly believe these bits of advice would not just help any previous version of myself, but also a lot of people who could be in the same position currently in their lives. So, whatever episode you're listening into, you can imagine that this is a note left to you from your future self. And for today's episode, it's brought to you by a situation that happened to me last week. So a little bit of context on that was I had one day planned to go enjoy the pool in my apartment building for the evening. I packed my things, got up there, saw how many people were there, and I was suddenly overcome with anxiety. Immediately, I felt nervous and scared, and there was this urge inside of me that wanted to turn back to head up to the comfort of my own apartment suite and cancel my plans. But the second thought to follow was that no, I deserve to be there as much as anybody else, and I had realized that what was holding me back from going ahead with my original plan was this overwhelming feeling of anxiety. So this episode is pretty much based on my anxiety and how I overcame it with a few simple steps. Now, to overcome something, I think it's important to understand what that thing is. And so when it comes to the question of what is anxiety, I have two definitions for you guys. The first is a feeling of nervousness, worry, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. And that's the general definition. The second definition, which is a psychiatric definition, is a mental condition characterized by excessive apprehensiveness about a real or perceived threat, typically leading to avoidance behaviors and often to physical symptoms such as increased heart rate and muscle tension. Now that we have that answered, it's important to dive into why we have anxiety. It's an emotion that is very normal to have among humans. I'm sure that everybody and their mom has felt anxiety at least a handful of times in their life. And really the reason why we have it is because it's a survival instinct that's kept us alive over the years. And its purpose was to help us sense and prepare for any dangers ahead. Also, lifestyle factors contribute to how much anxiety is present or how much anxiety we experience on a day-to-day basis. So things like food, sugar, alcohol, screen time, not being active, having too busy of a life, having too much caffeine in your daily regimen. All of these things can contribute to how much anxiety you experience in your daily life. But the issue actually becomes when anxiety becomes our default state of being. The body actually doesn't know the difference between an active versus a perceived fear or threat. It only actually knows what it's currently feeling. So you've probably heard this on a bunch of other self-development podcasts, but whether you're being chased by a bear or a tiger, or you're feeling a sense of anxiousness because of a presentation that you have to give in front of thousands of people, the body cannot tell the difference between those two fears of yours. The only thing that it knows is that it's feeling anxious and like it's preparing for some sort of danger. When that happens, we're constantly living in a state of fear and paranoia, which sets off our fight, flight, and freeze mode, and we become incapable of being able to relax, which is why something called safety signaling is very important. Safety signaling includes things like deep breathing, sunlight, grounding. These are forms of safety signaling, and food can also be a safety signal on a cellular level, that meaning things that we ingest can have an effect on how calm we feel. And in addition, when we are feeding our bodies, it gives us a sense of safety that food is always coming and it's not running scarce. But the two safety signals that I really want to talk about for step 1 in how to overcome your anxiety is deep breathing and safety affirmations. Deep breathing is incredibly important as the first step that you can do to manage and control your anxiety. If you think about it, when your emotion is high on anxiety, your rationale and your logic are low. You cannot think straight. And so when you do deep breathing, it takes your nervous system from a sympathetic state, which is your fight or flight, to a parasympathetic state, which is signaling to the body that you are safe. This takes away the focus from worrying about a perceived threat about the future to the present moment, focusing on your breath. And we want deep belly diaphragmatic breathing. When you take shallow breaths with your lungs, that's actually a symptom of how you breathe when you're anxious, because your body is preparing you for danger. In contrast to that, to signal to our body that we are safe, we want long, deep, and slow breathing. Your stomach should expand as you breathe in and then contract as you breathe out. We don't want the breath going into our chest and breathing that way. To keep this simple, because the last thing that we want is to be suddenly anxious if we are breathing correctly, take 4 to 6 seconds to breathe into and expand your stomach, and then breathe out like you're blowing through a straw for double the inhalation time. So if you want to breathe in for 5 seconds, then you'll breathe out for 10 seconds. Repeat that at least 6 times and you will notice a difference in how you feel, especially if your focus is on your breath and not on anything else. The other way that I actually like to signal to myself that I am safe is through affirmations in my head. After I've focused on my breath and counting, I'll continue to breathe deeply while telling myself, I am okay. I am safe. And that's actually what I did when I was in the pool area. So I went in and then I sat down on a chair and my heart's still racing. I'm still kind of on edge thinking that these people are going to judge me. What I did is I took some deep breaths, big inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth, but in a way that's not really noticeable to other people. And then in my head, I told myself, I am okay. I am safe. I am not in danger. I am okay. And it's almost like a technique that just soothes your nervousness and gets you into a more calm and relaxed state. So that's the first thing, is breathing deeply and also affirming that you are safe. Next, once you've been able to calm yourself by utilizing the deep breathing and affirmations, you should be able to assess yourself and your thoughts with more rationale. So the second step is to identify the thought that led to being anxious and challenge the truth or validity to that thought. You can notice that before every feeling, there was a thought that occurred beforehand that contributed to that feeling. So, for example, if you're feeling angry, you can notice that the thought beforehand was that you noticed the piece of trash that's been on the ground for 4 days that your spouse hasn't picked up yet, and that's what made you angry. If you're anxious, you may notice that you were thinking about the long list of tasks at hand at work waiting for you the next morning, or possibly the meeting at 9 a.m. that you're supposed to have with the big boss at your workplace. You need to question what the thought was that made you anxious in the first place. It may be conscious or unconscious, but we need to question ourselves on it. And the question of why and what is so powerful. So, why am I feeling anxious? What made me feel anxious? What thought did I just have before I started feeling anxious? Being able to ask these questions from a calmer state of mind helps you zoom out and see the bigger picture of what's actually going on. For me and my situation with the pool, I realized that my fear was that I would walk into this pool area and people would judge me for either coming to the pool at such a late time when the sun is setting, yet I look like I want to tan, or that my bikini was too skimpy because I decided to wear a more cheeky bottom. And for you, it might be that you're anxious because you are thinking about having to meet your boyfriend's parents for the first time next week, or you're anxious about having to give a presentation at your workplace the next day. But once I figured out the thought that led to producing the feelings of anxiety for me, I've gotten into the habit of asking myself if this thought is true. This has really helped me because it's made me realize and discover that about 95% of the anxious thoughts that I have are self-induced and in fact not true. So with the situation of the pool, I'm scared that people are judging me. People think that my bikini is too skimpy. But I ask myself, is that true? And the reality is that I have no way of being able to confirm that that is a true thought of every single person there unless I ask them. So really, it's something that's not really true for whatever my fear is. There was actually a study done at Penn State University, and it was on anxious thoughts and negative thinking. What researchers found out was that about 87% of what we worry about never actually happens. And interestingly enough, there was 79% of participants who discovered that whatever they were worried about, they could handle the difficulty better than they expected, or that the worry had taught them a lesson that was worth learning. That means that overall 97% of what we worry about or that is occupying our minds is nothing more than a fearful mind that plays exaggerations and misconceptions in our head. And with that knowledge, and also combined with our own acknowledgement that our anxious thoughts aren't true, it really helps to bring our heads down from the clouds of worrying about an infinite amount of things and into the reality that none of these things are actually happening in this present moment. So that's the second thing. First is safety signaling with deep breathing and affirmations. Second thing is challenging the thought that made you anxious and realizing that most of what we worry about actually never happens. I'll continue to repeat these two as much as needed before moving on to the third step, which I know a lot of you are gonna hate this, but the third step is exposure therapy. Circling back to what anxiety is and why we have it, it's a feeling of unease over something that we think is going to happen in the future or near future that we perceive as a danger to ourselves. If we are viewing this imaginary thing that's going to happen as a danger on a physiological level, but logically we know that it's not an actual or legitimate danger, one of the best things that we can do to get ourselves not to see that thing or situation as a danger is by exposing ourselves to it. The reason that we fear that thing or situation is because it holds some type of uncertainty, and we don't actually feel like we know what will happen or how we'll feel being in that situation. Our brains are also always looking for confirmation to what it's thinking, and so why not confirm the thoughts that the situation or the thing that you're worried over isn't so bad or isn't true? So with me in the pool thing, after I've done step 1 and step 2, I continued to keep myself there in the building's pool area, and some people looked my way, yeah, but none of them actually came up to me and told me that I couldn't be there or that my bikini was too skimpy or said anything directly to me that showed me that they were outright judging me. They didn't call me weird or anything nasty. Everyone was just simply enjoying their own time there at the pool, including me. And by doing that and staying seated there instead of leaving back to my apartment, it confirmed that my anxious thoughts and fears didn't happen. And so next time that I go to the pool by myself and that fear comes up again, which it will, because fears and anxious thoughts don't go away right away the first time that you try to overcome them. But regardless, I'll remember my previous positive experience and feel less danger doing it again. The more positive experiences over the fear that we can give ourselves, the easier the situations or experiences become over time. I'm not saying that if you have a fear of sharks that you should jump into a cage and expose yourself to being with sharks daily. What I'm talking about is the anxious fears that are holding us back from living our daily lives. Another example is this podcast. You probably don't know that I am highly anxious about creating this podcast, that I get highly anxious when it comes to recording the podcast and speaking and sharing my voice. My brain is signaling danger about the future when I do it, and that I'm going to mess up, or my words will stutter, or that people will not align with what I have to say. But the only way to get better and for it to eventually not have as much of these anxious thoughts is to continually do it. And the more that I expose myself and do it, the less danger I'll feel as I continue to record and put my content out there. Exposure therapy holds true from anxious thoughts around public speaking, meeting new people in social settings, being out in public spaces by yourself, driving, traveling on your own, or posting new types of content that you don't know how it will be perceived by the world, etc. So, for example, with me, it was being in spaces where I felt like I was potentially being judged and staying in that situation to get more comfortable with doing what I had originally planned to do, which is to hang out at the pool and enjoy my evening. And for you, it might be that you are anxious over public speaking, but you'll learn that the more that you expose yourself to public speaking by practicing, by doing more events, you become more comfortable and you perceive that thing as less of a danger over time. So to recap, step 1 is to do safety signaling via deep breathing and affirmations. Step 2 is to figure out and challenge the thought that made you feel anxious. Step 3 is continuing to expose yourself to the thing or situation making you anxious until it doesn't feel like a danger to you anymore. Bonus step 4 is actually in regards to lifestyle factors that we spoke about earlier in the episode, and replacing sugar and processed junk foods with whole foods, less caffeine and screen time, and more meditation, sunlight, and exercise. I guarantee you that if you apply these steps, you will become drastically less anxious and like a whole different person who is more in control of their anxious thoughts and feelings. The steps are simple enough, but by no means am I saying overcoming your anxiety will be easy. It's not going to completely go away, but you will feel that you have the power to manage it. Only you know what's manageable for you, and you have to meet yourself where you're at and start where you can. Start small, and then you can work your way into the bigger steps. So, that's all that I have for you today. I hope that this episode helps you in realizing that your anxiety has been lying to you and that you can overcome it by using the strategies talked about in this episode today. And if this episode did help you, please go ahead and share it and tag me if you do. It'll help get the podcast out there and continue to help as many people as possible as well. And if you want to be up to date on all the episodes released, make sure to hit that follow button on wherever you're listening to this podcast from so that you never miss another episode. With that, I will see you guys in the next one. I love you guys and take care.